Eva and I were like fire and water, bound by a pull neither of us fully understood. She was always the one with her head in the clouds, dreaming of cities she'd never seen, while I had dirt under my nails, set on a life carved out from hard work on the family farm. I still remember that first glance across the high school corridor, her with wild curls and a leather jacket, looking as out of place as a rose in a cornfield. Back then, my life was predictable. Mornings on the field, nights balancing schoolwork. Eva? She was skipping classes, smoking behind the gym, and talking about moving somewhere big, somewhere I'd never even thought about. The romance was wild, fueled by arguments that left us breathless and nights that blurred between teenage rebellion and something deeper. But after graduation, Eva kept to her word and left. She moved to Chicago, chasing a new life, while I stayed back, sinking roots in a land that had been in my family for generations. For years, I didn't hear from her. Not even a postcard. I thought I'd lost her, assumed she'd moved on to a life so different from mine that I couldn't begin to picture it. Years went by, and I kept busy. I expanded the farm, took up carpentry, and built a life. Then, one winter morning, Eva came back. She'd changed, but in ways that only drew me closer. Her edges had softened. The wild sparkle was still there, but with something else, something I couldn't put my finger on. We spent weeks catching up, rehashing old memories and laughing about our youth. It didn't take long for us to pick up where we left off, but this time it felt deeper, grounded. That spark was still there, and before I knew it, we were married, settling into a rhythm that felt right. It wasn't until recently that I started noticing small things, barely worth mentioning, at least at first. When Eva's business began to take off, I was genuinely proud of her. What started as a small investment from my side turned into her empire. With her determination and an endless drive that I'd seen glimpses of back in high school, she turned a single office space into a network of 8, spread across different cities, each one another testament to her success. She was in constant motion, early flights, late-night strategy calls, stacks of paperwork covering every surface in her home office. We hardly had time together anymore, but I brushed it off as the price of her ambition. Eva became a force in her field, a name that people admired and, at times, feared. The distance that grew between us seemed to happen gradually, almost like it had crept in the back door while we weren't looking. Some nights, I'd hear her in the other room, talking on the phone, her voice carrying a confident, almost chilling tone I hadn't heard before. It was a tone reserved for business, I assumed, and I figured she just didn't want to bring that intensity into our home life. Even with the prenuptial agreement we'd signed, which left me without any claim to her business, I felt we'd built a strong partnership. I never questioned the fairness of that agreement. She'd been straightforward with me from the beginning. Besides, I had my own successful investments in retail properties that were steadily growing. In my mind, we had everything we needed to make this work, a marriage where we both had our own thriving careers, our own identities, and the kind of mutual respect that could weather anything. At least, that's what I thought. Lila was a miracle, our one and only child. Eva's pregnancy had been rough, and the complications that arose during her birth meant we wouldn't be having any more children. The news hit hard, but we shifted our focus, pouring everything into raising her. I made Lila my world, and though Eva tried to do the same, her work often came first, pushing her into roles that took her farther and farther from home. As the years passed, I watched Eva's ambition grow fiercer, and it seemed that no amount of time or success could ever truly satisfy her. Realizing that Lila needed stability, I decided to open a daycare beside one of my retail stores, where I could keep an eye on her and create an environment that reflected my values. I wanted her to grow up knowing kindness, patience, and the importance of staying rooted to one's family. Day after day, I saw Lila blossoming into a thoughtful, spirited young girl who loved working alongside me. When Eva was away, I'd bring Lila along to the store, teaching her everything I knew, from bookkeeping to customer service, little lessons that I hoped would leave a lasting mark. Eva adored Lila, of course, but her approach was different. When she was home, she talked to Lila about big dreams and daring ambitions, ideas that seemed a world away from our quiet life in the country. Lila loved hearing her mother's stories, eyes widening at tales of boardroom battles and international deals. But over time, I began to see the same look in Eva's eyes that I'd seen back in high school. A gaze set on something far away, a life that felt beyond reach. As Lila grew, our dynamic felt increasingly unbalanced. I became the one grounding her, instilling compassion and commitment, hoping to shape her into a person who could balance dreams with loyalty. Eva, though supportive in her way, remained an elusive figure. Flashes of her presence interwoven with longer absences, her work a constant rival to the life we'd built. That evening, Eva and I were having one of our rare, quiet dinners together. Out of nowhere, she brought up a woman named Chloe Marsh. "She's a fascinating woman," Eva said, almost too casually, stirring her glass of wine. "Young, driven, willing to take on risks that most people would never even consider." I felt a pang of suspicion immediately. Eva's tone was light, but there was something unsettling in her expression, something I couldn't quite place. I'd met Chloe before, briefly, a woman in her early 30s who worked under Eva, managing one of her newer offices. She was bold, sharp, and unapologetically ambitious, but I hadn't given her much thought. At least not until that lunch. We'd met up for a quick meal at a place near my store a few weeks ago, a suggestion that seemed harmless enough at the time. Chloe had been friendly, sure, but then, halfway through our conversation, she dropped the bombshell. With a slight smirk, she leaned forward and said, "You know, if I were married, I'd have an open relationship. I think it's the only way to keep things fresh, don't you think?" She watched my reaction with an unflinching gaze, as if she were gauging just how much shock she could pull from me. I'd laughed it off at the time, uncomfortable but unsure what else to say. But now, as I listened to Eva talk about Chloe with what sounded like admiration, the alarms in my head grew louder. I looked at her sharply. "Eva, is there something you're trying to tell me?" She hesitated, her fork hovering over her plate before setting it down carefully. "I thought you might have figured it out already," she said, not meeting my eyes. "Chloe and I have discussed things. New ideas, fresh perspectives on relationships." "So, that's what it is then?" I pressed. "You started seeing other people, and you thought I'd just figure it out? That I'd go along with it?" Eva didn't deny it. She just sighed and said something about how this was normal in her circles, how even some of her colleagues saw open relationships as modern and practical. "It's nothing personal," she said, almost as if she were reciting from a script. "I just need more. And you're happy here with Lila, with the farm, with your life. I thought you'd understand." "Understand?" The betrayal settled like a weight in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "You know, there's something called alienation of affection in this state." I told her, letting my words sink in. "People still use it when they have to. So if you think you could just explore with whoever you want and walk away from this family, you're in for a surprise." Eva's face froze, the confidence faltering. I hired a private investigator the day after our conversation about Chloe. Part of me still wanted to believe that Eva's confession about her open relationship philosophy was just a passing phase, an experiment she'd abandoned. But when the investigator returned with files that spanned 6 years of names, dates, and places, I knew the truth was uglier and deeper than I'd ever imagined. The first name on the list was Nate, her assistant. He was the one who'd accompanied her on countless business trips and late-night strategy sessions. I'd thought of him as an overworked, loyal employee, someone who admired Eva's tenacity but stayed professional. The photos, though, told another story. There were images of them leaving a hotel arm in arm, stolen moments in restaurants, and a few pictures that made my stomach twist with disgust. But Nate wasn't the only one. Over the years, Eva had spun a web of lies that stretched across her offices and into our personal circle. I found out she'd been with others, including 2 men I'd thought of as friends. There were intimate messages on company phones, receipts for gifts that never reached our home, and reservations at hotels where she was supposed to be working late. Eva's reach extended beyond business. She was a master at compartmentalizing her life, maintaining a facade of respectability while carrying on with a series of men who seemed only too willing to indulge her whims. As I went through the files, one by one, I felt like I was piecing together a puzzle that painted an image I could hardly recognize. Every name was another blow to the life we'd built. My wife, my partner, the mother of my child. She had used her position, her charm, and even her intellect to get whatever she wanted, leaving the rest of us in the dark. When I confronted her, she barely flinched. "I did it because I could," she said, her voice flat, as if her betrayal was just another business decision. There was no apology, no remorse, only a cold, clinical rationalization. To her, the affairs had been about control, about power, about satisfying her whims in a world where she answered to no one. She'd spent years building a life where she was accountable to no one but herself, and apparently, that included our marriage. I'd always thought trust was something she and I shared, a mutual foundation we'd built over years. But that trust had been paper thin, hiding an undercurrent of deceit that went far deeper than I could have ever suspected. When I learned that Nate had become violent toward his wife, Chloe, I couldn't ignore it. He was not only Eva's assistant, but had entangled himself in our lives in ways I hadn't anticipated. Chloe had always seemed fiercely independent, but by the time she came to me, bruised and desperate, I saw just how deeply Nate's cruelty had scarred her. I helped her find a safe place to stay, miles from the reach of Nate's controlling grasp, making sure she had everything she needed to start over. I was still reeling from Eva's betrayal, but there was no question that I'd protect Chloe from Nate's reach. But Nate's bitterness didn't end there. Soon after Chloe left, he turned his sights onto Lila. I never thought he'd go that far, but he began pursuing her under the guise of offering help with her new clinic, a place she'd opened in town, her first step toward the independent life she'd been building with my support. Lila brushed off Nate's comments at first, politely deflecting his advances. When he started showing up unannounced, leaving gifts and letters, she warned him off, thinking it was just harmless infatuation. But I knew better, and my worst fears were confirmed when Lila called me, her voice shaky and weak, saying she'd been attacked. I rushed to the clinic, pushing through the broken glass and overturned equipment to find her on the floor, bleeding and bruised, her clinic in shambles. She told me Nate had come in, demanding she listen to him, and when she refused, he'd snapped, dragging her to the ground and beating her until she managed to break free, escaping only when a patient entered the building, scaring him off. The image of her bruised face and torn scrub seared into my mind, a sight I knew I'd never forget. Once I was certain she was safe, I called the police and provided them with everything I had on Nate, evidence of his harassment, records of the incidents with Chloe, and now his brutal assault on my daughter. Nate was arrested that same day, but even as they took him away, a part of me felt no relief. Lila's clinic was shattered, her sense of safety destroyed, and I was left to pick up the pieces of a life torn apart by the twisted actions of a man we'd trusted. The legal process began immediately, with restraining orders and police protection, but the emotional damage lingered. Nate's actions had left scars, on Lila, on Chloe, and on me, driving home the realization that the web of betrayal Eva had spun around us extended further than I could have ever imagined. Now, my priority was keeping Lila safe, making sure that Nate would never have another chance to hurt her, or anyone else again. The divorce was as inevitable as it was overdue. Eva's entreaties for one last chance rang hollow, and every conversation only served to remind me of how much she had shattered. I was done. We divided the assets with the same cold calculation that had come to define our relationship. She kept her offices, her wealth, and the reputation she'd crafted so carefully. I kept the farm, the land where I'd invested years of hard work, and most importantly, I kept Lila. There was no question that she'd stay with me. She'd already chosen her path, rooted in the values I taught her. Even after all that had happened, Eva tried to bargain for reconciliation, spinning tales of a fresh start and insisting that she could be a better wife, a better mother. I'd never seen her so desperate, watching her try to reassert control, as if this marriage were something she could negotiate back into her life. But I'd seen the depths of her deception, and I knew her promises were as flimsy as paper. Every message she sent, every late-night call, felt like an intrusion into a life I was finally beginning to rebuild. My peace, my stability, everything I'd fought to salvage for Lila and myself was something Eva would never understand. She wasn't just pleading for our relationship back. She was pleading for control, for a place in a world that was no longer hers. I refused her at every turn, keeping our interactions strictly through the lawyers, ensuring that any lingering ties were purely legal, void of any emotional pull she thought she might still have over me. As the final papers were signed and she reluctantly left the farm for good, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't thought possible. It was a clean break, but one that left Eva scrambling, watching as the pieces of her old life, the life she tried to twist and manipulate, slipped beyond her reach. And as she walked away, I saw her for what she truly was, a hollow figure, clinging to a past that no longer existed, in a future where she was finally powerless to affect us. Years drifted by after Eva's departure, each one bringing a bit more peace, a bit more clarity. Life on the farm had settled into a rhythm, one focused on healing and building something real with Lila by my side. But it wasn't until Clara came along that my heart truly began to thaw. Clara was the quiet, resilient type, the kind of woman who'd been through her own battles and found strength in the aftermath. She had 2 kids of her own, a pair of spirited boys, Sam and Leo, who brought a fresh energy that the house hadn't seen in years. At first, Clara and I kept things simple. She'd stop by with the boys on weekends, sharing laughs over a big meal, joining us in the garden or for a few hours by the fire pit as the kids ran wild around the property. Slowly, those weekends grew into something more regular, something natural, and my home became a place of warmth and laughter once again. The boys turned the place upside down in the best way possible, their boundless curiosity and mischievous grins reviving the farm, while Clara filled the house with her warmth and calm presence. Lila took to Clara and the boys with ease, forming a bond with them that ran deep. She'd always been close to me, but seeing her with Sam and Leo, playing the role of older sister and mentor, was something special. Clara's influence brought out a side of Lila that I hadn't seen before, a blend of confidence and joy that had been buried under the weight of our shared past. Watching her grow into her own with Clara around was one of the greatest gifts I could have asked for. With Clara, I began to dream again, envisioning a future that looked less like survival and more like a life I'd once hoped to build. We didn't rush things, taking our time to let the kids grow close, to rebuild from a foundation of respect and understanding. Clara had her own struggles, her own scars, and I admired her strength and the quiet resilience she'd built over the years. She brought stability and lightness into my life, an understanding that grew over time until we became each other's constant. Soon enough, it wasn't just my farm. It was our farm, a home that Clara helped me transform into a bustling, welcoming place. The boys had their routines, learning to plant, to fish, to look after the animals alongside me, their boundless enthusiasm infecting even the quietest corners of the house. Weekends turned into weekdays, and eventually, Clara and her boys moved in, blending our lives with a quiet joy that felt like redemption. I found purpose again, not only in watching Lila succeed as she built her own career and followed her dreams, but in creating a life with Clara, whose kindness and grounded spirit reminded me every day that we'd both been given a second chance. The life I'd lost with Eva, the family I thought I'd never have, Clara made me realize that dreams don't have to die. Sometimes they just need to find new roots. As for Nate, prison became the ultimate reckoning, a place where he faced the consequences of his actions in ways I could never have foreseen. When the police had taken him away, I thought that would be the end of it, that his confinement alone would serve as the justice he deserved. But life inside those walls offered him no escape, no reprieve. His years of manipulation, his twisted, predatory behavior caught up to him, turning him into an object of scorn and abuse in a system where vulnerability could be easily exploited. The guards and other inmates had little sympathy for a man who had preyed on women, and his suffering became a cruel mirror of the very pain he'd inflicted on those around him. It was a bitter irony, watching the man who had shattered my family become a target in the same way he had once made others feel powerless. Stories trickled back to me, whispered from friends with connections. Tales of how Nate struggled to survive in a place where survival meant submission. In a way, prison had become a punishment that went beyond the mere isolation of a cell. It turned into an unending cycle of degradation, a warped punishment fitting his crimes. For Nate, every day became an ordeal, a reflection of the damage he had once carelessly inflicted. I won't pretend it gave me closure or made things right. His suffering didn't undo the damage he'd done to Chloe, to Lila, or to me. But it did give me a sense of balance, however dark, knowing that Nate was no longer able to hurt anyone else, that his own actions had sealed his fate in a way that left him helpless, just as he had once left others. And while I didn't seek out the details of his suffering, the knowledge lingered, a strange comfort, reminding me that sometimes justice arrives not in grand gestures, but in a relentless echo of a man's own sins coming back to haunt him. As the years passed, the sting of Eva's betrayal faded, and I began to look ahead, focusing on what truly mattered: Lila and the life we were building together. Watching her grow into a strong, compassionate woman who shared my values was a constant reminder that the struggles I'd endured had a purpose. With each success, each achievement, she became more than I could have ever dreamed, embodying the spirit of resilience and integrity that I'd hoped to pass on. When she was ready to open her own clinic, I knew exactly how I wanted to support her. I gifted her a piece of land just beyond the farm, a plot overlooking the hills, rich with the same soil where I'd spent so many years of my life. It wasn't just land. It was a legacy, a place where she could build something that would last, carrying our family name and values forward. Lila took to the project with all the dedication I'd seen in her since she was a child, and her clinic soon became a place of healing, a sanctuary where neighbors came for care, comfort, and compassion. But my commitment didn't stop with Lila. I wanted to give back to the community that had supported me through my own hardships. Over time, I started funding educational scholarships for young people from nearby towns, encouraging those who had big dreams but little means. I worked quietly, reaching out to families I knew well, helping cover college tuition, apprenticeships, and local training programs. These were kids who reminded me of myself at that age, and I wanted them to have the opportunities I'd fought so hard for. Some grew up to be teachers, others became tradespeople, a few even opened their own small businesses, all with the support of the community that had nurtured them. My quiet contributions became part of the town's rhythm, stories of gratitude woven into family dinners, whispered during town events, a legacy spreading in subtle but powerful ways. And though I never sought recognition, I felt a deep satisfaction knowing that my efforts were creating lasting change. Each life I touched, each young person who stepped out into the world with a helping hand, became part of a collective legacy. With Lila leading her clinic and new generations embracing their potential, I saw that the impact of my choices would live on far beyond me, a quiet but enduring mark on a community I loved. Love, it turned out, found me when I least expected it. Clara and I grew together naturally, our connection deepening in the quiet spaces of everyday life. Her laughter filled the house, her presence made everything feel complete, and her boys became my sons in every sense of the word. We built a life of simple joys and shared purpose, blending traditions and creating new ones as a family. It was more than I'd thought possible, a chance to start anew, surrounded by people I loved. We embraced life together, celebrating milestones and making memories that would last. Weekend picnics under the oak trees on the hill, summer nights by the fire, and holidays spent crowded around the table. It was a life rich with warmth and laughter. Clara was my partner in every way, standing by me through the challenges of parenting and sharing the triumphs, big and small, that made each day meaningful. Her boys, Sam and Leo, looked to me as a father, and I took that role seriously, guiding them as they grew and sharing with them the values that had grounded my own life. And then came the day Lila sat us all down, a mischievous smile on her face. She looked between Clara and me, her hands resting on her stomach as she broke the news. "You're going to be grandparents," she said, her voice full of joy. I felt my heart swell, a warmth spreading through me that was almost overwhelming. I'd spent years pouring everything into Lila, watching her grow into the incredible woman she'd become, and now she was starting a family of her own. It was a new chapter, not just for her, but for all of us. The months flew by, filled with preparations, family gatherings, and endless conversations about the future. Lila's clinic thrived, and the community rallied around her, excited to welcome the next generation. When her baby finally arrived, a beautiful, healthy girl, I held her tiny form in my arms and felt a fullness I hadn't known was possible. I was surrounded by the people I loved, a family bound not just by blood, but by resilience, by shared dreams, and by the strength we'd found in each other. As we celebrated together, I thought about the path that had brought us here, the scars we each carried. We had all been shaped by hardship, by betrayal, and by the challenges that had once felt insurmountable. Yet those scars had strengthened us, preparing us for this family we'd become. Looking around, I saw everything I'd ever wanted, not in the way I'd once imagined, but in a way that was deeper, richer, and infinitely more meaningful. We had triumphed over the past, and as I watched Clara hold our granddaughter, laughter filling the room, I knew we had built the life we were meant to live. In the end, I left this world as I had lived it, surrounded by family, friends, and a community I'd poured my heart into. As I drifted from one life to the next, I felt their presence, each face a memory of shared moments, laughter, and lessons passed down through the years. My funeral, I was told, was a gathering that filled every inch of the space, people standing shoulder to shoulder, spilling out the doors. They came to pay their respects not just to me, but to a life that had, in some small way, touched theirs. It was humbling, even in the beyond, knowing that the legacy I'd built was rooted in love, integrity, and resilience, values that had guided me and would continue to guide the family I left behind. Clara, steady and graceful as ever, held our children close, offering comfort through her quiet strength. Sam and Leo stood by Lila, each of them carrying pieces of me in their own way, reflections of the life we'd built together. As for Lila, she had grown into a woman I couldn't be prouder of. She stood tall, composed, and radiated the spirit of the family legacy, one of love, loyalty, and strength. I knew she would carry forward everything we had built, continuing to nurture the land, the clinic, and the community with the same compassion and dedication I'd tried to instill in her. In a quiet moment after the service, they scattered Eva's ashes at sea, releasing the remnants of that chapter to the waves. It felt like a final piece, an acceptance that all we'd endured had led us here, to this place of closure and new beginnings. She was part of our story, a fragment of the past that had shaped the present. But now it was time to let her go. As Lila took on the family legacy, she carried with her the lessons, the strength, and the values that had defined us all. Her daughter, still small, was already learning what it meant to live a life of integrity and purpose. The farm, the clinic, the lives we'd touched, all of it continued to flourish under Lila's care, a testament to the resilience that had been our foundation. Though I had left this world, my spirit lingered in the love and loyalty that bound them all together. I knew that they would carry on, thriving in the life we'd created, honoring the family legacy in every action, every choice, and every life they touched. In that, I found peace, knowing I had left behind more than memories. I had left a legacy that would endure for generations. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe. New cheating wife stories tomorrow.